The Pension Act was passed into law in 2004. We've operated the Act for 7 years, for 6 years now, and a lot of things have changed. And they haven't, when it was passed into law in 2004, it was novel and nobody had experience with pensions, contributory pensions. Haven't had the benefit of 6 years of operation. We thought it's time to review certain sections of the Act to bring it in line with current realities, to expand the coverage of the industry, and to widen the scope of coverage and to increase the impact of pension funds in the economy. I mean, that's the overall objective of the reform. The other true important aspect is to institutionalize PENCOM a bit more, and also to ensure that exemptions from the scheme are within the ambit of the law. For the public sector workers, before now they had a final salary scheme, which was the old defined benefit scheme. That scheme is made up of two components. One is a gratuity, which is paid when the worker stops working, and then a pension that is equivalent, almost equal to the final salaries of the employee. Now, the PRA 2004 sort of abolished gratuity for the public sector workers, and one. Number two, the rates, the pension that we pay when compared to the old scheme was not exactly the same. So there has been agitation by employees to have their pensions increased to a higher level. Our recommendation, our thoughts are simple. Keep the 15% for private sector employers. Have a dialogue with government to increase the contribution rate from 15 to 20%. Now, that increase in contribution rate is a decision that government will have to take. This is just a proposal in the Act. So that's what we're saying, that keep the 15% for private sector and look at the possibility of increasing the contribution rate for government to 20%. But there's another way around it. The other way around it is what we're also looking at, the minimum pension guarantee. Because if people are complaining of the pension levels, another way to deal with it is to institute a minimum pension so that when you retire, regardless of how much you have, you can get a minimum pension. That will be funded through mechanisms, either through government contribution and also from some contributions from the industry.
So what other pertinent issues are being proposed in this amendment?
Well, apart from the contribution rates, there are other key things that are of even more concern to us. One is application of the Act. I'll run through them and explain. Application of the Act is one of them. The other one is the exemption of some categories of employees from the Act. The other one is custody of annuity funds with pension fund custodian. I think the last one, which is major, is we want to restrict the establishment of new closed pension fund administrators, particularly for the public sector. Now, let me just run through them very quickly. The application of the Act, we're saying that the Act should be applied to employers with staff of 3 and above. So reduce the number of employees required to be covered by the Act from 5 to 3. Which means that a lot more companies and entities will be covered by the Act, particularly the informal sector. Yes. So we also want to see the Act being applied to the informal sector. Right now, the way the Act is worded, it doesn't cover the informal sector. The informal sector can contribute on a voluntary basis. Now, whilst we're not going to make it compulsory for the informal sector, we want to amend the Act in a manner that allows the private sector workers, informal sector workers, to be part of it. And essentially, it is to allow every individual to open a personal pension account without linking it to an employer. Because right now, for you to have a pension account, you have to be working for an employer that is registered either by the CAC or by company or any other form of registration.
So that's what the Act is actually going to be.
That's what, but I'm saying the other things that even they might not be in the Act, but we want to include in the Act, to allow the application to cover employers with staff of 3 and above, and also for the informal sector. So we want every Nigerian. I think the point is that pension is almost like human rights. You can't I don't know why people think that they can live without having a pension. The informal pension arrangement in Africa has broken down. The extended family system is not working. So there's no way you can even be walking around without pension. I mean, you're not thinking of the future.
But I guess to be worthy to collect a pension, you have to be a worker. Or doesn't it necessarily follow?
Well, you have to be, and it's a definition of who is a worker. You have to be economically active to collect a pension. So, I mean, some of the people that work for themselves make a lot more money than people that work for either government or private sector, but they have no pension arrangement. So you could see a successful businessman today. Tomorrow, he's in his 60s, he's no longer able to work. He goes into abject poverty. I've seen that happen time and time again. We have experience of that in our various villages. You see a man who was successful, and when he retires, he falls back to nothing, and he goes back to the village and he's suffering because he has no pension. And let me also make the point that people think that their house is their pension. Your house cannot be your pension, because your pension is something that gives you regular income on a monthly basis. So it's not an asset that you hope to sell to collect an income. It's an arrangement that the income is guaranteed to come to you irrespective of how the asset performs. So if you have a house and a tenant is living in it and he doesn't pay rent, or you can't get a tenant, then you don't have a pension. So a house cannot be a pension.
What about the investment options for pension fund? Is it too restrictive for good returns?
Well, I don't think so. We always get this question. The investment guideline allows us to invest in practically any instrument that is available in the market today. So it's not restrictive. The problem is that those instruments don't exist. So I give you an example. People talk about investing in infrastructure. You can't take money and go and invest in a road. You invest in an infrastructure bond. And, in other countries, the first issuance of infrastructure bond is done by the government. Government has not issued any infrastructure bond in Nigeria. So if government had issued an infrastructure bond and pension funds did not invest, then there would be a case. Another point is people say, we want pension funds to invest in housing. How do you invest in housing? You invest in housing through mortgage-backed securities issued by either banks, mortgage banks, or investment banks, but reputable institutions. There are no such instruments issued by reputable institutions in Nigeria today. So I think where we're coming from is, first of all, you need to protect the pension funds to ensure that they don't go into the wrong hands. So PENCOM started with a very restrictive guideline in 2005, but they've opened up the investment guideline now. We can invest in equities, in bonds of state government, federal government, private sector companies. We can invest in private equity. We can invest in real estate, through real estate investment trusts. We can invest in infrastructure bonds. We can invest in asset-backed securities.
Well, how effective has compliance been as regards this contributory scheme? That employers are having to pay 7.5% and employees as well having to pay that. What is PENCOM doing to improve compliance by employers?
Well, compliance has improved. I would say that the public sector, federal government compliance is very high. There's practically no federal government establishment that is not in compliance. Now, compliance levels at various federal government parastatals differ for different reasons, but federal government compliance is very high. It's almost 100%. For the private sector, no. Private sector compliance is still very low. And the reason is that, the uptake was initially done with big companies, banks, multinationals. Most of them have complied now. So what PENCOM is doing now is to go down to the next level of companies, the small and medium scale enterprises. The compliance level is low for different reasons. One, economic reasons. Most of them say they can't even afford to pay salaries, not to talk of pensions. A lot of them are grappling with difficulties of operating here, including power and the infrastructural bottlenecks.
Now, if you have companies, private companies that cannot pay their own part of the contribution, isn't that supposed to be like a very big challenge that should be addressed one way or another?
Well, the way PENCOM is addressing it is through the use of agents, recovery agents, who go after these companies to recover this money, because those monies are actually debts being owed. There are deductions from employees' salaries and also contributions from the employer, which has not been remitted. And we are seeing increasingly higher improved levels of compliance as these recovery agents visit these companies one after the other. Now, what I would say is that, our attitude is that pension is compulsory, but it's not a tax. So whilst pension owed is a debt, we should be mindful of the fact that, the economy is not exactly very, easy for everybody. What we don't want are people who can afford to pay and who are not paying.